We are going to start with this session number 1, which is basically how we are going to use these guidelines that were just presented. So now everything is fresh in our minds. And basically in this session, I would like to have your views on how the guidelines can help you on improving the enabling environment for civil society to operate. Basically, as we already also these guidelines are, of course, a framework that can be used by different stakeholders, as it was already said. And one of the objectives is exactly the enabling environment. So I think it's very important because this is, of course, a very important aspect for civil society to operate in the region. The guidelines, what they will give us is that at least we'll have a framework for all your countries where the Commission on a yearly basis will report. We'll have a report that will allow also for discussions. So on this, exactly on this assumption, I would like to hear from you, basically, what you think that these guidelines can help you on improving the enabling environment. So who wants to start? I don't know, also online, of course, you are very welcome to participate and to contribute. So who would like to break the ice? I can, of course, also come up with some more, maybe some questions that you can start starting to maybe think about. So as you can see here, even on the agenda, one of the questions will be how the guidelines help in enlarging, protecting and monitoring civic space. So how do you see that these guidelines could help exactly on protecting civic space for civil societies to operate in the Western Balkans and Turkey, of course?
Have more mics. Thanks. Hello again. I mean, each of us is coming from its own, perspective and understanding of the real situation and development in our countries. So, but I'm more than 20 years being present in the NGO sector. And I remember our first ideas, what we were entering this sector for in a democratic transition of our countries. And first, congratulations for this document, which is, trying to bring the standards. It's not easy process to address all the inputs and ideas that we have to be more effective. It's bringing standards, also criteria, how to move forward. But on the other side, also has a kind of, effects that is not all comprehensive for civil society. And if I mention that in last, to not go far, but in the last 5 years, we have shrinking space of civil society organizations. Many organizations closed. They are dying and they are still struggling with their sustainability and survival. And on the other side, we are bringing this document to enable more space for society. On the other side, our societies are too much politicized. It's every single corner in our societies is politically controlled or politicized, and we are losing the game. The initial idea to make our governments accountable and transparent and to enjoy the democratic freedoms as a civil society, at least in my country, but I think in other countries in the region, we face the same situation. So now these guidelines provide kind of, space for those who are already profiled or established organizations. But what about the new coming young generation of NGOs who are willing to self-organize, self-structure, and whether this document is providing any kind of option or opportunity for such kind of organizations? And then who will enable this space for civil society? EU altogether or with our governments? What kind of dialogue, what kind of ideas and resources we have to put in order to make it functional? this creates a lot of additional questions for everybody of us, for each of us. And it is again new process that we have to remind ourselves, maybe not every month, but once in a year as the monitoring reports are coming. In a previous informal discussion, I was asking one of the Taxo, representatives in Macedonia, how we arrived to this stage when the Taxo is, not now able to help the organizational growth and competencies in the civil society after 3 phases of Taxo. Because Taxo has provided us support to those who are professional, to well-established organizations, but their number is small, and we see all the time the same actors around. Don't see new faces, new ideas around. Maybe someone will disagree, but this is my personal, understanding what's going on, at least in this country. So I will stop here.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, of course, we will continue this discussion. I think one of the important issues, I think, especially in this session, will be also to discuss what about the institutional and legislative framework for the civil society to operate. So I would like also, okay, please. No problem.
I forgot one more important point, that also when it comes to the legal environment and our operational capacities, we are all the time put in a reactive mode as a civil society. And we lost momentum of being proactive and serving where the government is absent. In my first intervention this morning, I mentioned, not necessarily we have to cooperate with institutions, because sometimes they are just putting barriers on implementation. To have them formally just comply with some kind of criteria is not, enough or good for us. So in that sense, I'm very much looking at the civil society as a disobedient part of the societies, is trying to demonopolize the political power, but also the economic monopolies in our societies. That's the future, or my understanding about how democracy should function. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Maybe here.
Thank you very much. This is a very tough questions. How the guidelines help in enlarging, protecting, and monitoring space. It's very, very challenging, very, very ambitious job to protect and to monitor the civic space. So we have a guideline and we have a very ambitious job. How can we do this job with this tool? So maybe one answer to these challenging questions might be the guidelines say what the governments should do, basically, and what society organization should do in some places. And I'm completely agree with what Tolan says before the previous session. But apart from that discussions, the guideline says that what the government should do. But basically, we are communicating with the government through this tool via IPA mechanisms. And there was a kind of sectoral approach in the IPA in the previous ways. And there's a civil society subsector in it. And in the most positive, under the most positive assumptions, the governments took these guidelines in relations with just only that sub-sector. So the public officials or all the others deal with, they think about that this is the jobs of the colleagues who are dealing with that subsector. So the first thing that should be done to think about the mainstreaming these principles throughout that all the mechanisms, not limited with the pre-accession cooperation, but all the other European Union mechanisms, including European Parliament. Maybe European Parliament also has this kind of initiatives in relation with the candidate countries. And if these documents, these guidelines, these principles applied by the various bodies of this complex EU structure, they became much more mainstreamed. All the responsible duty bearers from the government, from the different ministries of the government, should be faced with these guidelines through different mechanisms, not just only with the civil society subsector. There's another mainstreaming issue. This guideline should be mainstreaming with the other IPA subsectors, windows with the new names. So we have the environment, climate change sector, social, all the other regional competitiveness. All these standards can be applied to all these other windows. Not only they are designed to implement this civil society subsector. So what can be done to it can be mainstream through all the EU mechanisms, and it can be mainstreamed by all the negotiation channels.
It will be interesting that you made very relevant comments and, of course, broader comments about the guidelines and how they can be used and mainstreamed also through other institutions. But on this specific question of the enabling environment, which basically has to do with the institutional and the laws that have to be there for the civil society to operate in your countries, how would you see that some of these indicators could help civil society to actually have a bigger dialogue with the governments to improve the enabling environment? Do you think the guidelines can help on this? The indicators that are here can help on that? Or
it depends on the first two questions. If these guidelines, these principles are well mainstreamed by the government, by the European Commission, civil society organizations can use these guidelines to their monitoring efforts, their advocacy activities. They can produce shadow reports. Think about this option. Should I produce a shadow report for this guideline or not, as an NGO?
I think, of course, this can be one way of use the guidelines, of course, because now you have at least something that the European Commission.
What will you do if I produced that shadow report?
To me?
To the Commission.
Well, I think it's a question. I am not the person that is going to answer to you.
I'm not personally asking to you.
Yes. I think one of the things that was also said here is that even the engineer will use also guidelines to also produce a report.
So there should be some kind of infrastructure to collect, to publish all these mechanisms. For that reason, at the previous, I don't want to repeat myself. For that reason, I propose to create some kind of continuous mechanisms. We can prepare yearly reports instead of yearly monitoring. We should have a kind of continuous monitoring and yearly reporting. But now we have to, basically, there are some considerable reasons that can be understandable, but we are making a yearly monitoring, and based on this yearly monitoring, yearly reporting. We can think about a kind of website, web portal. Every civil society organization can report through that web portal whenever they need, whenever it is needed. These mechanism can be approachable for every time, for everyone. We can think about this kind of continuous structural mechanisms. Civil society organizations can find very innovative way to use these mechanisms if it is well established. If civil society organizations discovers that it is working, believe me, there will be many other organizations use the same road, but it should be first. It should be proven it's in an operational way. It's an effective way, because civil society organizations have very limited resources. For that reason, they can prefer to focus on, let's say, universal periodic review reporting instead of contributing to the EU guideline monitoring efforts. For that reason, we should think about the effectiveness of the monitoring process. If these guidelines will be a very effective, very powerful tool. And for your first questions, that's a much more comprehensive question. I don't want to take too much time of all of our colleagues, but there are many dimensions of this civic space. One dimension is the laws and administrative bodies. The second dimension is the capacities of the organizations. This is civic space is a physical space defined by the physical actions of the actors. These actors, mainly the civil actors, and it's not necessarily these borders driven by the laws. There are many other physical effective factors that limit these factors. So, of course, the first factor is the legal environment, the laws, regulations, the other kinds of legal documents. And it's not limited with the laws on associations, laws on civil code, etc. There is many other regulations in environmental field, etc. So, okay. As I said before, this is very open questions. For that reason, maybe I should end at this point.
For your contribution, maybe Lotte, you want to add something, please?
In a way, I just wanted to come back. Thank you. I think that's very relevant. And 2 points, and it links actually the two things. The enabling environment, as we tend to speak about it at the sort of central level, but indeed it's also at the local level. And that's where these grassroots organizations that you were talking to are active. So I think maybe it's also interesting to reflect here sort of where should one put the focus at the local level to have the enabling environment for these smaller organizations to work, or in whatever form they are. And then I just wanted to draw your attention to our special objective 1.5, which talks about specifically this the importance of providing this enabling environment also for the small organizations at the local level and grassroots organizations. Thank you. And can I, and just one question more to just launch, that also one of the new things we introduced in these guidelines were references to the money laundering and anti-terror legislation. And I think it can also be interesting to try and anticipate what else might be coming and what can civil society organizations do to sort of be prepared for that and make sure that whatever that might be is taking into account these guidelines and these principles that we're setting out.
I think there's interest also from the gentleman. Okay. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. My name is Georgios, and I'm coming from the side of the contractor, but I don't want to use this opportunity to speak as the project director. I want to speak on my capacity as a researcher of EU integration and EU accession reforms, but also as a practitioner and participant in some of those very important reforms in a very difficult environment, such as that in the Western Balkans, in particular in Serbia. Enabling environment, you need two to tango. We have a very beautiful document. It speaks about how to improve or enable the legislative and normative framework to provide access, or at least not block access, to civil society organizations. But you need to have awareness. People on the other side, on the side of the government, need to be made aware of this document and of its objectives. At the same time, there are fears. People have a particular agenda. I look into it from the side of the policymaker or the side of the civil servant or the officer sitting in a ministry, which has a workload, has job to do, and has tasks to perform. And there are these documents or people knocking his door and her door and say, for me, this is nuisance. I have a strategic document. The government has given me a work plan. I need to produce this. There is space. If somebody communicates to them, I feel, in a way that they can understand why this is important and how this contributes to his or her job, there is room for them. Then one of our panelists here suggested that there are champions in the administrations. There are champions who are also coming from the side of the civil society. You need to make them aware. At the same time, you need to build a network of such champions. What I'm suggesting is coming from experience of reforms in chapters such as 23, which is the rule of law chapter for judicial and fundamental rights. It's coming from PFM reforms, chapter 32, financial control. These are tangible experiences that I'm trying to share with you here. And these people can be open, can be difficult, and can be, however, made open to listen to you. Then you build desire to move forward a particular agenda. So I would suggest that awareness is not being sidelined or is not being underestimated when we will be communicated, or you will be communicated these guidelines. And fears need to be addressed, because the goal, if you want to move, there are various ways to move things. It's by shadowing, it's by producing reports that are critical, or by monitoring reports. Another important way is by helping them bake in those objectives in their strategic documents. And how do you do that? Thank you.
Okay, I think the gentleman out there is also wants to speak. You have a micro, so please, because you touched upon an issue that, of course, maybe some of the people here can actually give a little bit of input about, for instance, for many of these legislative framework, there are working groups usually involve civil society organizations that can already from the beginning make comments. So maybe you can also give a little bit of your views about how these guidelines are, again, maybe stressing the fact that, yes, civil society can and should participate from the beginning, even in the legislative framework, but not exclusively, to have a better civic space for civil society. But I leave the floor to you, please.
Okay, thanks a lot. As later we talk, I think more topics are put on the table, so it's very difficult to follow the agenda. I will try to catch 2 or 3 moments. The first one, I think, is, in my perspective, this part, specific objective number 1, is the best of the guidelines in terms of the elements that constitute the documents, the indicators. I think it is well covered for most part of what constitutes the fundamental freedoms and the accessories to the freedoms. So I'm quite positive about this. It's not the first time that we have such documents. We have to take into account that at least for quite a number of years now we work with similar documents. But if the EU starts to use these documents in reaction to negative developments, then we might really see a good momentum. And what I mean here is also what our colleague from Turkey was referring. We shall not wait only for an annual report to react on these things, and it is especially from the EU side, because us as civil society, we have been covering, monitoring, reacting on instant basis whenever restrictions to these freedoms have happened. So just as an illustration, if there is an issue with anti-terrorism legislation, the EU delegation should not wait for the country report or the annual report to put it somewhere in between lines, but it should use the document to react immediately and tell the government that this is not in line with this and this document. Saying this, I think one of the most problematic indicators among the very few problematic in this part is especially the one that Liselott mentioned, 1.5. Which says small community and local organizations and civic initiatives are allowed to operate by law without registering. It falls within the same logic which I consider problematic even in my panel speech. It is about the form and the size, not the approach. Not only small organizations need to be allowed to operate unregistered. It can be also a national organization which decides to operate without being registered, and we should make sure that they are allowed to do so. The language here is not in that. It says small community, local organization. The second thing is, again, community organizations are implied to be small, not necessarily. You can be an international organization and have explicit and intentional ways of involving your community, or you can be a village organization which is closed, doesn't have connection with the community. It's a group of 2 or 3 friends or family. So the size not necessarily tells the way that you represent your constituents in the end of the day. So on this one, I would be very careful in making using and implementing it. The third thing is related to what Nadir, if I'm right, said. It's a same concern, but I think we should not expect from the EU to support those new emerging. I think it's a lost battle, unfortunately. I wouldn't want to see this, but the EU bureaucracy has confirmed for multiple times that it is not fit for organizations which are not at a certain level of bureaucracy. The last chapter of the guidelines confirmed this, but even our experience. The colleague from EU delegation in Serbia mentioned that most of the financial support to third parties is being copy-pasted. And this is because the EU requires from these re-granting organizations to be like 100% in line with the Prague regulations, although the Prague doesn't say this. It allows for the adjustments, but the safe bet is you only copy-paste that. And the very last thing is a very specific comment. I don't know if this is the moment to say it. It is about the indicator on volunteering. In this part, the biggest issues for me are with this indicator, which says that indicator 1.10a, laws regulating volunteering are adopted. This implies, again, one way of seeing how the volunteering should be developed. In Kosovo, but I know also about the region, but let me be correct and talk only about Kosovo. Volunteering is not endangered because it's not being regulated. It is because it's not being promoted, encouraged. So it's not that we have unregulated volunteering which is misused in a way and that requires regulation. It's the vice versa. So these kind of very specific wordings need to be taken into account while developing the rest of the implementation part. Thanks.
Thank you very much. I think all your comments are very concrete and I think very, very useful. Just a comment about exactly what my colleague of the delegation in Serbia said from the delegation in Montenegro. Actually, when we do financial support parties, we don't need to apply the same rules that we have for our main beneficiaries. We don't need. But the issue is that when we engage with our partners for them to do financial support to third parties, they are afraid also of not following our rules. So it's a very complex issue. We have tried to move away from this, that when we are basically signed with another beneficiary to support to third parties, that exactly our rules. And in fact, they don't our rules because they can even submit proposals in the local language. can also have more simplified procedures, but it has been very difficult to actually move, especially to the organizations that are not registered. And this also has to do, I think, with the legislation that is inside of the countries, that a lot of the organizations don't want to do something different from what the law indicates as civil society organizations. And in this respect, for example, I come from a country, Montenegro, where I'm working, where actually the law is very much on NGOs, is not even civil society in the broader sense. So there are lots of challenges also to do after to move away from the traditional thing. But I agree, my colleague is right in what he said, and we continue to try to move and try to challenge how we can support organizations that are not the registered organizations, whatever they are small or not so small. But yeah, I'm going to pass here to my.
Thank you very much, Güneş from Third Sector Foundation of Turkey. So I cannot emphasize enough the importance of the guidelines for enlargement of civil society and an enabling environment, because I myself doing a monitoring job in my position. As to say, for instance, we are as a member of BCSTN, we do annual monitoring. So these indicators, more or less the same with what we are working with in our methodology. And of course, I understand that it is by an institution produced methodology that you are following, that it is produced by by EU. It's a very important thing. It's not the same as CSOs. We are producing reports about the monitoring on civil society. So it should be as it is. So as my other colleagues emphasize enough that there should be mechanisms by EU to implement the end results of these monitoring observations. So if there wouldn't be mechanisms to implement and for the well-being of these problematic areas that were observed, so it wouldn't be any difference than any other NGOs or CSOs produce an MM report, because it's basically the same. So first thing, in EU, there should be mechanisms. And the second point is there should be a methodology which is widely used in every and each country. Of course, there would be specific differences to some countries, but if we can see a methodology widespread, then these reports can talk to each other. There would be room to compare these reports, and these reports basically would be more trustworthy. So what I see and what I understand, and in every countries, there are other methodologies has been used until now. So maybe developing a common methodology could develop the trustworthiness of these reports. So we also could contribute in that case to these reports, and our report could talk to Taxos report. Because Turkey is a big country, I understand, for instance, there are multiple monitoring reports. It's very normal for a country like us. But for instance, in other countries, I understand that Taxos produce a report, and CSOs also produce other reports as well. So how do these two talk to each other? I think we should think about that as well. So about the comment of my colleague, creating networks for discussing the end result of these reports. For instance, we develop many networks within the institutions, but the problem is that if there isn't any political initiative, these networks can collapse very quickly. These people in institutions can be changed, can be removed, so that we are left with nothing at all after years of work to build up networks. So if, for instance, in the case of Turkey, I know that very well trained, educated members of political institutions, it is limited to their effort. And if we don't see a political motive behind these people in institutions, it's not actually working at all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to build up on Gunnar's intervention, and I wanted to stress the importance of having both. I mean, of course, the Commission's report on the guidelines, but also the value of having this independent, let's say, reports prepared by civil society, because it's really clear that we have the, let's say, freedom to be more critical, to be more open about things that, well, we see that very often are diplomatically said in the reports produced by the Commission. Of course, in the progress reports, we see that the TAXO, for example, report from last year was used. So they have been using the guidelines, the reporting, the monitoring, but in every country to a different level. So there's no standardized way. There are a lot of issues that were raised by civil society, but were omitted in the progress reports. So on one hand, we miss the consistency, let's say, but on the other hand, this is why I think it's really important to have this like independent monitoring, which, well, of course, goes in the same line. I mean, the monitoring matrix also covers the enabling environment, and it supports, gives more information, but it's still on the standpoint from civil society, which I think is greatly important. And I think I had other comments. But yeah, maybe just wanted to mention that, for example, why I'm like, just to follow up on this, for example, the issue of gongos and pongos that we mentioned already in several countries, they have so far have never been addressed in the progress reports. And we keep on talking about this, so, and it's a bit difficult conversation because it's difficult to track, it's difficult to understand in a way. We don't have the right methodology maybe on this, but it's an important issue that is happening in the enlargement countries, and we don't see it, for example, reflected even in the new guidelines, although this is not something very new, right? So maybe this is one thing that should be further developed when further developing the guidelines. And also maybe I would mention as well the monitoring of these freedoms in the digital environment, for example, because this is something that was very evident in these last 2 years, and it's still not reflected in the guidelines. So maybe this is where we could go further, or I don't know, bring additional value from other actors and so on. So yeah, I could end there. Thank you.
Could you please direct, there's would like to speak online, Siezana?
Hi, yes, is the technology enabling? Can you hear me? Can I go ahead?
Yes, please, we can hear you.
Great. So I just wanted to react to a couple of points and maybe hopefully provide some further clarification on some issues that were raised. And it's a fascinating conversation. So thank you very much for raising the points. Now, at the very beginning, Nadir asked who will enable the space. It's the government's, it's the state duty to enable the space, and that's how the guidelines have been framed in terms of what are the state responsibilities, what are the responsibilities of the duty holders under international human rights law as regards freedom of association, freedom of assembly, and freedom of expression, and other aspects of the enabling environment. Now, this leads us to another question, and I thought a very interesting comment made by one of the subsequent speakers. So who will monitor the guidelines? And as Lotta said, the Commission will monitor, TAXO will do it on its behalf. Civil society will be consulted in the process and is seen as a critical source of information. So the survey was mentioned, but also other forms of input. Now, the colleague who spoke said, should we be doing shadow reports? And I thought it was a fascinating idea. And then I thought, well, shadow reports of what? And to me, it would be shadow reports about how the EU is using the guidelines. So not just to provide a critical kind of a critical reflection on the monitoring, on the annual monitoring reports, but also what happens with the guidelines and how are they being used by the EU and possibly by the governments as well, and maybe a degree of self-reflection to also add civil society. It doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to cover everything, but maybe the most salient issues that might arise in a year. I think this might be interesting. Now, if I'm allowed just a couple of more precise comments in relation to specific issues which were raised. For instance, the indicator 1.5a about small and grassroots organizations. And I take the point about small, and I went back to check how did small come about, and it came through the consultation. So already the final draft that was extensively consulted through the process that Richard had explained contained the word small throughout. So that it's a pity in a way that this comment was not made before, because then we could have dealt with it. But then again, looking at the indicator, I don't think there is anything that precludes a slightly broader interpretation of it. So one aspect could be looking at small unregistered organizations. Another could be to look at unregistered organizations more broadly. I don't think there's anything in the indicator that would preclude the monitoring exercise from doing that. And now the comment about 110A, which is about laws regulating volunteering. Yes, it's true that laws in and of itself will not solve any issues about volunteering. Just to say that there are several indicators looking at volunteering, both under the enabling environments objective as well as under the CSO accountability objectives. So volunteering is being approached from a variety of perspectives, and the existence of laws which should facilitate volunteering is just one of them. And it is good practice to have laws on volunteering. And then finally, the point that was raised about gongos, we had extensive discussions as we were finalizing the language of the guidelines. We had extensive discussions what to do with gongos. And the thing is, we don't have a definition of gongos. So if we have gongos in the guidelines, then we don't know what we're looking at. And what seems to be a working definition of a gongo is that they are NGOs that receive government money that we don't like. So that's not very helpful for the purpose of kind of monitoring. But we did address the aspect of what the negative effect of that might be in various other indicators. So it's not disappeared. It's not disappeared completely. It's there, but it's not explicit under the heading of gongo, but rather under different other aspects of enabling environment. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much for the input. I think it complements very well some of the discussion here, and also explains a little bit from where some of these indicators actually came about. I'm going to give now.
Yep. Okay. So yeah. Does this work? Yeah, maybe this one. Yeah. First of all, I think that this document will collect dust in drawers of ministries, NGOs, and everyone else. I mean, let's be realistic. We had documents like this for the last 20 years and nothing has changed. It's a very fancy tool with nice colors, but in reality, it is not used except on conferences. And if we have some kind of annual reviews or whatever, then someone will remember that there is a document like this. I'm sure that half of the people which were sitting in this room today did not read the document. And I'm sure that 99% of the authorities which are supposed to read it will not read it. I'm sorry to be so blunt, but that's the reality of the situation. And that's something that the EU should actually finally accept as a fact and stop trying to put civil society into a framework in some kind of frame where they would like us to do what, well, they would like to use us as a tool for their purpose. Civil society is something completely different, and it should not be something which is led by donor wishes and projects, but rather by needs of the societies where they work. Unfortunately, for the last 20 years, the project-led donor community has destroyed the civil society in these countries, even before it was actually created based on the needs. And if you continue to do it in these next 7 years in IPA 3, as I said yesterday on talking to some of my colleagues, you won't have people in these countries for IPA 4, because you will not have an impact. You will spend the money on consultancies, on big NGOs, which are not NGOs or civil society organizations, they are consultants. You will produce millions of documents, strategies, analysis, or whatever, millions of reports, but no real impact, no real action on the ground.
What's the solution?
The solution is to stop over-analyzing. I've been hearing analysis of analysis of analysis the whole day. We are over-analyzing stuff. You have to come out of your Brussels bubble. Life is not in line with the guidelines. Life is happening. It's not written in a guideline. And we have to start working. We know what are the problems. We know where the corruption is. We know what are the solutions. So you have to finally fund the solutions and not fund analyzing the solutions or analyzing the problems. We have to start working.
I'm not going to answer. Of course, this is a recommendation, which I think it's very interesting because civil society is exactly this. People have different views, different opinions. And of course, this is what makes interesting the civil society, that not everything is in one direction. And I think we take very well note of what you said. It's very interesting view. Is maybe not the only view, but is one view. I'm going to pass it.
I think this one works. Hi, I'm Jelena. I'm a country coordinator task for Serbia, but I also have like extensive experience both in public administration and civil society sector, and also donors. So when I'm speaking now, I'm not going to agree with you. I'm sorry, not because we worked so hard on those guidelines, but I think that some of the issues that were problematic with the previous guidelines, we now have to take care of and really try our best from all sides to overcome those issues and to make those guidelines something that it's worth really for everyone in the process. So I think that our main danger in this is that they are named DG NEAR guidelines for EU support to civil society. And it's going to take a giant leap for the states and public administration to understand this as some kind of their own responsibility. So as DG NEAR, as the EU Commission, as the delegation in each country, you need to help national civil society, TAXO if it's there, a National Research Center to communicate guidelines. And that's something that was already said, to communicate guidelines as something that is a standards expected to be respected. And then when you have standards, you have at least like we have certain national contexts that are not, in some cases they're in some levels they're similar, in some levels they're very different. So for us, for example, it's very clear who is Gongo. If you have an organization that is repeatedly getting the public funding and there is no trace on it on the internet, no. I'm going to forget where it's.
Did you ever name a Gongo? Did you ever point a finger?
Yes, they are extensive.
You have actually told the EU.
There is no definition, but I think that we can all. There are the papers that are showing that there are organizations repeatedly getting public funding without any kind of trace in a public domain on anything that they're doing. But the point is that we can talk about this forever. What I wanted to say, one thing is that we need to communicate this properly on a national levels to all government officials, to all ministries. And the second of all, I think that the guidelines need to be referred in the other documents from the other DGs, from IPA when it comes to the funding of other sectors, particularly public administration reform, particularly rule of law, particularly tax reform, because otherwise, and then you refer to your own standards as something that has to be met in certain areas and sectors. And that's something, if we don't have that, if this is still called DG NEAR guidelines for EU support, it will be understood as something that is used by by either commission, by delegation to program the funds for civil society. It's no one business except civil society and you. We need to bring to the table immediately all levels of the national not levels, but all sectors, not only those institutions that are working specifically with the civil society, because all the standards, objectives are relevant for the particular and various areas and domains of the public administration. That was but I really hope, and that's really because otherwise I wouldn't be sitting here. We have it. I'm just going to repeat something that we hear a lot in Serbia as kind of a comment to the civil society. So you are kind of criticizing government for nothing. You're just asking for the things that are not known. They don't know what's asked from them. They're pretending, the government is pretending often that they don't know what is the standard asked for them, because there is no the paper that actually oblige them to do anything. Guidelines are still not obliging document, but they're there with the certain standards that are very clear. So let's hope this one would do the job.
Thank you very much for your comments. I tend to agree with you that actually these indicators, some of them are actually very ambitious. And of course, this is not to just be conveyed by the ministry, for example, that deals just with civil society. Especially we are even talking about tax incentives or loan volunteering. So many different things that of course are part of other sectors. So of course, enabling environment for civil society. Exactly. But then there are many other levels that, of course, they concern many different other sectors as well. I'm going to pass the microphone. Okay, please. After there's also something online, but I'm going to give the floor first to this lady because she was asking already, and then there's another lady over there, and I'm seeing you, and then we go to the online, and then I can give, if we have time, again, the floor to more comments, please.
Okay. Hello, everyone. I'm Sihija Dedović, coming from organization from Bosnia and Herzegovina, who is working more than 20 years on the level of women empowerment through education. I could say a lot about this and agree on many of what have been said and disagree on some of, but I will just focus myself on the specific objective number 3. Speaking about this one is that, I mean, the point which I want to somehow focus here is that whatever delegation or taxo is doing, at least I'm speaking about the Bosnian environment, it cannot last for long if you don't transfer this know-how to our institutions. I'm speaking in Bosnian case about the Ministry of Civic Affairs and the Ministry of Justice, who are ministries of justice on the entity levels, because those 3 institutions are responsible for NGOs. I mean, I'm saying should be responsible, but somehow I think that those institutions like taxo or delegation also can do much more. From my experience working more than 25 years in NGOs, could do or should do also now more to help or teach or force our institution to know our NGOs, which are, they should be responsible for them, but they even don't know them. And they don't have this system how to know NGOs, to know what they are doing, and to, because in this specific objective, we are speaking about capacity of NGOs also. So they need to know which of these organizations has some of these capacities, and to make a system how to recognize those who still need help to build these capacities, and also how to build system, how to recognize the progress when some organizations are doing, and somehow to reward this progress. And
I'm sorry, exactly. I'm going to cut. But in this group, we were supposed to just focus on objective one. I'm really sorry. I think your comments are also very good.
Yeah.
But I'm really sorry because I see that already everybody is here. Do you really absolutely want to say something in one sentence? Okay, then yes.
Oh my God. Thank you. Ariola from Partners Albania, part also of the Balkan Civil Society Network. I just wanted to say a few things, not one sentence, but some. With regards to the guideline, of course, is a very they are positive, very positive, and we are very positive about that. But considering that we already had a first guideline, 2014, 2020. And the result that we had from the implementation and the objective that those guidelines had to encourage the enlargement countries, the more conducive environment for civil society, and the results that we had at the end, which was not very promising. Of course, we have to take some lessons from the past. Who enables the space? I'm getting to one of the colleagues just mentioned. The space is enabled by the institutions, of course. If you see here, but also in other forums, the presence of the government is almost to nothing. So they are almost absent. And also, this is the situation also in our countries when we go back. So, increased awareness with the institutions is not enough. It's not that they are not aware, not informed, but they have this document really needs to be a binding documents, political binding documents for the government, so they can really start implementing the document. This is very important because it cannot be just some document that we report or even European Commission reports once per year, and we give some feedback, but also the governments need to be really accountable on that and to monitor and to have some self-assessment mechanisms to monitor how they perform in each of the objectives and the indicators. And the second about the indicators, there are many and we cannot go one by one, but really it's very important that the indicators to be discussed further on the indicators. And as my colleagues mentioned, indicators like the voluntarism thing, but also other ones. We have been also said this during the consultation, is not the issue of having the laws, is the issue of having strategies or mechanisms, because not always the law are the answer for regulating. In this case, they are regressing the situation and not progressing that.
Okay, thank you very much. I think, of course, all these points are very, very relevant to make this document binding to the governments. I think it's not possible, as you can imagine, because these are guidelines, and the Commission, in fact, in many of our approach to the governments of your countries, of course, is not imposing rules. We can, of course, enter in dialogue with the governments, but we cannot impose.
Binding not by imposing, but binding through a very concrete monitoring methodology.
Okay, that is a different thing. Okay, as a monitoring, of course, I think that's the intention here.
Monitoring
on top
measurements.
But as I think, Well, I think this is what is here written, and part of the EU support, and I think in many Western Balkans, is also even to give them technical assistance for them to implement certain of these standards. So I'm not going to, I'm not going to enter in the dialogue because I think everybody is already, so we can talk after, outside. Just going to read out what was written, no, you will do, what was written in the chat, and then we close. And then, of course, I'm very happy to continue to discuss some of these very interesting issues outside, but we need to close. And our rapporteur, I hope that she will be okay, surviving with all this very interesting.
Okay, well, just very short comment from Voskre. I hope I pronounce right, and which is she thinks that it's quite in line with our recent discussions on gongos, and she says that it's great to see that enabling environment goes beyond the laws that allow registration of CSOs, and that they also include attacks and other factors that can shrink the space. This is very relevant for women and civil society organizations, as I have mentioned at the beginning, as they are exposed especially to online attacks. What can be challenging in this area is the anti-gender movement, since this movement is forming and registering CSOs using the rights narrative, but at the same time attacking and spreading false news against women civil society organizations. And at the moment, there is one official verdict by the court in North Macedonia for this. And then thanks a lot to Voskre for this comment, and we appreciate your contribution.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Our rapporteur will make a very good job, I'm sure. And I hope that after, if she needs a bit of support, you chip in and support her and complement something. Okay, thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you.